Long before the Blemmyes became the stuff of medieval nightmares, they were real people. A nomadic tribe occupying the Eastern Desert between the Nile Valley and the Red Sea coast. The Blemmyes were documented in Roman records as a persistent military and political force in Nubian territory. They raided Roman frontier settlements, controlled trade routes, and held enough power to negotiate treaties with the Roman emperors as late as the 5th century AD. They were not mythological, and they were not monsters. They were sovereign people that Rome could not fully subdue, and that inability to conquer them planted the first seed of what would eventually grow into one of history's most bizarre mythological transformations. In this video, we're tracing exactly how that transformation happened, from real tribe to headless creature, and what it tells us about the way ancient and medieval civilizations processed the things they feared and could not explain. If that kind of deep history is your thing, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss where this story goes. The earliest Greco-Roman accounts that mention the Blemmyes are largely territorial in nature. Boundary disputes, military engagements, and mentions of their presence along caravan routes. But as Roman influence in the region weakened and direct contact with the Eastern Desert became less frequent, the accounts shifted. Writers who had never been to Nubia began filling geographical gaps with imaginations dressed up as reportage. Travelers' tales circulated through Alexandria and Rome, describing people at the edges of the unknown world in increasingly sensational terms. And the Blemmyes, already associated with resistance and the unknown south, became a canvas for that projection. The linguistic dimension of this shift is where things get particularly fascinating. In several ancient African political traditions, a people described as without a head carried a very specific meaning. It referred to a tribe or community that lacked centralized leadership, a king, or a recognized sovereign authority. It was a political descriptor, not a physical one, as these oral and written traditions passed through layers of translation and cultural interpretation, that is, from indigenous African languages into Greek, then from Greek to Latin, and eventually into the hands of medieval European scholars. The metaphor collapsed into the literal. Headless stopped meaning leaderless and started meaning exactly what it said. By the time the Blemmyes appeared in medieval encyclopedias and Mapia Mundi, they had their eyes in their shoulders and their mouths across their chests, and no one writing about them seemed to question how that had happened. The earliest visual depictions of the Blemmyes in manuscript illustration were crude and almost hesitant, as if the artists themselves were unaware of how far to push the distortion. In the oldest surviving representations, the face is low on the body, close to where a neck would be, with the head simply absent above it. It reads more like an anatomical compression rather than a deliberate monstrosity. But as the image traveled across centuries, something changed in the hands of the illustrators. The face did not stay near the neck. It migrated downward, settling into the chest, and with each generation of copying, the features became more deliberate, more arranged, and more threatening. The eyes widened, the mouth stretched, and what began as an absence of a head became the presence of something far more unsettling. Comparing manuscript traditions across the 9th through 14th centuries, the evolution is not random. The wonders of the East tradition, which circulated widely in both Latin and Old English versions, show consistent pattern of the facial features being repositioned to maximize confrontation. The eyes move toward the outer edges of the chest, giving the figure an unnaturally wide field of vision, the kind that belongs to a predator that cannot be approached from the side. The mouth, sitting at the center of the torso, grows larger across successive copies, often depicted open, which in the visual language of medieval iconography almost always signals aggression or consumption. These are not passive curiosities being recorded for encyclopedic purposes. The illustrators were constructing a threat, and each copy pushed that threat further into the body of the viewer's imagination. On the great mappa mundi of medieval Europe, geography was never just geography. These maps were moral documents, cosmological arguments rendered in ink, and the way they organized space reflected exactly how medieval Europeans organized the understanding of the world and their place within it. Jerusalem sat at the center. Rome and Constantinople occupied positions of gravity, and at the outermost edges, where the landmasses thinned and the known world gave way to speculation, that is where the Blemmyes appeared. Their placement was not accidental and it was not decorative. They functioned as a boundary marker, a visual declaration that beyond this point, the familiar rules of creation no longer applied. They were the cartographic equivalent of a warning sign drawn in flesh. Cartographers working in the 12th and 13th centuries faced a practical problem that doubled as an ideological one. Large sections of Africa, Asia, and the Far East remained uncharted by European experience, and leaving those spaces blank on a map was both visually unsatisfying and conceptually unforgiving. Blank spaces implied ignorance, and ignorance implied vulnerability. Filling those spaces with monstrous races like the Blemmyes solved both problems at once. It completed the map visually while also asserting a kind of knowledge, a claim that even if Europeans had not been there, they at least understood the nature of what lived there. The grotesque figures crowding the margins of the Hereford mappa mundi and the Absdorf map were not admissions of uncertainty, they were the opposite. They were civilization drawing a firm line and labeling everything beyond it as other, dangerous, and irredeemably strange. What made the Blemmye specifically so effective as a Buddha creature was a particular horror of its design, which was rooted not in total alienness, but in partial familiarity. A dragon at the edge of a map is frightening, but it is entirely foreign. The Blemmye carried a human face, recognizable eyes, a recognizable mouth, and the basic architecture of a person. The combination of recognition and wrongness is psychologically far more destabilizing than pure monstrosity. Medieval viewers looking at these maps were not seeing something completely alien at the borders of their world. They were seeing something that looked almost like them, arranged in a way that made that resemblance feel like a trap. It communicated that the edges of the world were not simply dangerous in the way that wild animals or rough terrain were dangerous. They were dangerous in a way that could wear a human face. Thank you for watching. Until the next one.